Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast in association with Charles Tyrwhitt. Want to work on your golf swing in comfort or head to the cricket in the summer wearing something sharp? Charles Tyrwhitt has a collection of smart casual menswear perfect for cricketers, professional and novice alike. Use the code Wisden10 and you can get an extra 10% off on their online sale. If it's good enough for Josh Butler, it's good enough for us. Australia have retained the Ashes just as you thought. It couldn't get much worse. For England, it did, and then some. Australia's 267 is the lowest score to win by an innings in Test cricket this century. It's their 12th win in the last 13 Ashes tests held in Australia, a humiliating 3 days in Melbourne for Joe Root's men. I'm Yas Rana, and with me over Zoom this morning, the morning after the night before, to make sense of it all and wonder where England go next, is the editor-in-chief of Wisden Cricket Monthly, Phil Walker, and former England batter, Mark Butcher. First off, Phil, an update on your physical health. I won't ask about your emotional well-being just yet, but how's the cron?
Feeling a bit grotty, but hopefully coming out the other side. But you can't divorce the one from the other. I woke up this morning feeling like shit, frankly, but it can't be unattached to that devastating shambles that I saw last night. I have to be honest, I didn't watch a massive amount of the Adelaide Test match because after 2 days I felt really sad. But I've watched far too much of this last one, far too much. And it's definitely dragging me into the realms of the unwell. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you're not alone, I'm sure. Let's jump straight into it. Butch, England have lost a lot in Australia over the years. But have you seen anything quite as submissive as what you've seen over days, particularly days 1 and 3 there at the MCG?
I don't think I've ever seen batting as bad. But then watching first-class cricket over the course of last summer, I'd say exactly the same thing, completely different circumstances and different sort of quality of opposition and different intensity in terms of competition. But I wondered, and having a sort of a WhatsApp chat with the old man over the last week or so, I wondered as to whether people talk a lot about the sort of the gap or the difference between county cricket and Test match cricket. And from personal experience, that gap has always been a very big one. It's always been pretty large. But I do wonder if the guys currently playing for England at the moment are not only coming up against a gap that is large and always pretty much has been, but have gone into this series more ill-equipped than any other team before it to cope with the demands of high-quality, quick bowling on Australian pitches. And I think that's the saddest part of it for me. You can talk about sort of selection. You can pluck a few names out of the air. You can talk about the type of bowlers that are successful in county cricket as against what you come up against in Test matches. But fundamentally, the basic techniques of all but Joe Root, and to a slightly lesser extent Ben Stokes, or to quite a lot lesser extent Ben Stokes actually, are just so poor that it's not surprising that this team, or this sort of selection, this current selection of England Test match players have collapses sort of one every third innings. There's a massive implosion and they get knocked over for next to nothing. And so there was an inevitability about it, which kind of tempers any sort of anger or sadness really in what's gone on over the last couple of days.
Yeah, inevitable is a word that people use a lot. Phil, how frustrating has it been that it's not just the guys who might not be ready at this stage of their career to do battle against this sort of attack in Australia? It's not just them who struggled, but it's pretty much everyone's underperforming the bat. Only Milan is performing above his career average. Even Root is down about 10 runs per dismissal in his Norman. He will be as frustrated as anyone with the way he got out, particularly in the first innings. I think he talked about parking away that dab to third man before the tour. That shot's proven to be his downfall again. Everything that could have gone wrong with the batting has gone wrong. How frustrating is that?
Well, it's maddening, isn't it, for everybody, not least inside that dressing room. There's no question that the pain will be very real and the embarrassment will be very real. And it's not just felt inside that dressing room, it's felt in our own front rooms, and it's also felt across the game as well, because when England play Australia, you have two cultures at one another. It's not just two teams of 11. And the inevitable questions and the necessary questions that flow from all of this, from the latest humiliation, have to be broad and widespread questions. They have to be addressing the whole coaching culture of the game, the whole attitudinal culture of the game. There are going to be manifold, myriad theories that are going to be flying around, and we can throw a few more around today by all means. But this feels, to me, more acute than at any other time. And maybe I'm a bit sleep deprived, right? And maybe I'm just a bit sad and I've got the plague. But this feels to me like the tipping point to end all tipping points. We've gone to Australia before and been turned over badly. If you take it back to 10-11, we haven't got close to winning a test match in Australia since 10-11. That is an astonishing state of affairs when you're taking it back to 11 years back, when we went out there and we thought that our game, through two divisions, through central contracts, through prioritising the red ball game, through pitches that you could actually score runs on in county cricket and all the rest of it, that we were developing, admittedly with a bit of help from South Africa, we were developing the core of a culture that is sustainable. Since then, it has fallen off a cliff. And as I say, we're all going to be throwing around a million theories, and quite right too. But this needs a real kind of root and branch structural analysis, and some honesty as well. Some honesty from people who are calling the big shots. But people need to come up in front of a camera and say to people why so much emphasis is put on white ball cricket, for example. People need to make the kind of socio-economic argument for it. And then people might go, okay, right, well, if we don't have that in the height of summer, then where's the money coming from? And so on and so on. But there is so much obfuscation, so much hiding behind inept half excuses and painful management speak from certain people. We still pick the right team. We've just got to eliminate, execute our skills, all that bollocks. There has to be root and branch cultural change right from the top. And there has to be a kind of glasnost approach, right? No more lying, no more cover-ups, no more pretending everything's rosy in the garden when it's clearly not, from top to bottom.
So I'll
tell you what, sorry, I'll tell you one thing, and we can kind of start here. I think we went back, I know Phil's gone in quite hard on this over the last couple of days, but I remember during the podcast when it was first announced that Chris Silverwood was going to have every single job under the sun, and I said it was nonsense then. We'll use Phil's word, it was bollocks then, it's bollocks now. Joe Root, I'm afraid we've given him an enormous amount of leeway as a captain over the years, because he's such a magnificent batsman. But as a captain, he just is not the man for these times. England needs somebody like Nasser Hussain, who's going to be clear-eyed, not only about what happens in terms of his own team and his own performance and the type of players and characters that he wants in that team, but he also has to be somebody that has the guts to stand up to the ECB and say, no, this is what I want. This is what my team needs. This is how we're going to go about trying to win the Ashes back. And let's face it, we kind of take the mickey about the sort of the emphasis that's placed upon the Ashes. But if it isn't the Ashes, it's the only one. It's the only series that matters, home and away, right? Always has been. Everybody gets judged on it. English cricket gets judged on what happens in the Ashes. And quite frankly, we've been utterly abysmal in this series. The last series down there, 5-0 is not looking like something you could have a little sort of nervous chuckle about. It's looking like an absolute certainty. And the game, as far as red ball cricket is concerned at home, is in an absolute disgraceful mess.
Yeah,
it's a disgrace. I mean, I finished my last commentary stint of the summer on the 2nd of October at Lord's in a match when the leaves were falling off the trees and it was freezing cold. That's the importance of county cricket has been pushed to the point where you're playing it in the snow in springtime, and with brown leaves sloshing around your feet at the end of the summer. It's absolute nonsense.
I don't think we're being too reactionary at all, and I think it's worth laying out just how bad this problem has been for quite a long time. It's definitely not a problem confined to this series alone. So in 2021, England have been bowled out for under 200 13 times in 15 tests. England have been bowled out for under 100 6 times in the last 4 years. Since the start of 2018, England have been bowled out for, since the start of 2018, England are more likely to be bowled out for less than 150 than reach 370. That's mad. Of the 17 top 7 batters to debut in the last 6 years, none average 32. 17 batters, no one averages 32. 11 average between 27 and 32. 3 between 24 and 27, and 3 below 20. I mean, we'll talk about Silverwood and Root later, but this goes so much deeper than that. There's an excellent piece on Crick Buzz on all this by Rob Johnson, who speaks to Paul Farbrace, who until 2019 was England assistant coach and is director of cricket at Warwickshire. He said, I think we've got too many batsmen in county cricket that have got techniques that are flawed. There are many quirky techniques in English cricket. People have got too quirky, too funky. You know, this idea of batting on off stump, bats coming down from gully with 3 or 4 movements before the ball is bowled. There's too many people that haven't got the temperament to bat for long periods of time. I think our coaching has got lazy in the last few years. Coaching in England has gone away from instilling basics in young players to actually saying, play your game, play the way you want to play. It's a cop-out because coaches are not strong enough. They're not working hard enough to instill the basics in our young players. And as I say, there are too many players at the ages of 15, 16. The techniques ingrained into them are not good enough. Coaches have let them get away with it because they want to be their friend. They want to be nice to them and they want to encourage them to hit the ball well. That's pretty hard-hitting stuff from someone who's involved with England so recently. Phil, what are you going to say?
I just want to add something on that. I thought it was a really, really excellent piece, by the way, by Rob. Through the magazine, we've spoken to similar people to Paul Farbrace and Paul Farbrace himself. We've spoken to various coaches within the game over the last few months. In particular, in July, actually, we ran a front cover story that ran over 12 pages, England's red ball crisis. So this is not reactionary. And in that piece, which I painfully reread this morning, there was a quote that jumped out at me. Now, we're talking about the culture of English cricket here. We're talking about the coaching culture of English cricket, right? This piece I wrote, it was called It's Technique, Stupid, right? And I spoke to Alan Butcher, of course, the Magus himself, who said, well, he said he's felt like a dinosaur for the last 20 years. And Mark will obviously know exactly what I'm talking about here, because Alan has said, and he's one of the most respected batting coaches in the country. And he said, whenever he's opened his mouth in the last 10, 15 years, he's always felt like he's a dinosaur for thinking that people with good techniques have got a far better chance of succeeding. It sounds straightforward. It is straightforward. And yet it's become so garbled right from the bottom upwards, right? Now, listen to this quote. This is from a chap called John Neal, who heads up the ECB's coaching education program. So he is in charge of bringing coaches through from the grassroots level all the way up to the county level. He said to me, the further up you go, the less you should be telling people what to do. It's a bit like me saying to Joe Root, well, your left foot is in the wrong place. Joe would probably work that out for himself. Your job there is to facilitate him and to help him to understand. Now, on a very, very low level, there's some kind of logic in that, okay? Although it's flimsy, and I don't necessarily agree with it. But when you're bringing people through, at kind of level 1 level, for sure, learn, hit the ball, enjoy it, then we can refine it from there on in. But that is a problem that goes right to the bottom, right to the whole grassroots setup. If you are not instilling the fundamental basics, or if as a coach, you don't have the confidence to tell a child or a young player or a teenager what to do, and if instead you choose this kind of holistic approach of developing people and personalities, rather than developing how to actually play the game, the hardest technical game that was ever built in the history of the world, then those two schools of thought are clearly, they are at loggerheads with one another. And at the risk of, sounding like, well, back in our day, this is how we were doing it. You only have to watch for an hour or two to see that techniques, even at the top level now, have become so garbled and so confused and so higgledy-piggledy, that bats are coming down from here and back lifts are coming back around the back of your head and all the rest of it. The game, when you're facing 145 clicks in Australia, the game has to be simplified to the bare basics, to the necessities of batting that have stood the test of time for 100 years and more.
But do you agree with Farbrace's take there? And if so, why do you think that's happened?
Well, I do, but the reason I laughed a couple of times was because Paul Farbrace is involved in all of this stuff. You know what I mean? It's all very well for him to come out and be hard hitting and come out with all these, but he's been in it. He's been at the very top of the tree. So, you know, what were you doing to stop all this while you were involved in it? And I'm not having a go at Paul. I admire and respect him, but for crying out loud, you know, I know the stuff you're talking about when it comes to kids, because I've recently become involved in a coaching setup myself down in Croydon here, and we've asked for clubs and schools to send kids that are on recommendation. Really, it's sort of like being your best and brightest and most talented. And we have found that we've had to go back to year dot, grip, stance, backlift, and hammer that over the course of many weeks in order to get them to a point where you could actually do something a little bit more advanced, and dare I say it, from their point of view, a little bit more interesting. So look, I completely agree, but I'm sorry, I have to. My cynic head sort of swells and the red light goes off a little bit when people who are actually involved in it come out talking about the problems that people on the outside have been talking about for ages, as if there was nothing that they could have done to stop it. And the reason why I mentioned Root and Silverwood at the very beginning of this chat is because NASA came up against a very similar situation in terms of when his captaincy started. The team were the worst team in the world. I was involved at the time. We'd beaten South Africa at home, but we'd been smashed by Australia or whatever ever since, albeit never 5-0. I hasten to add. And it took a very, very strong pairing at the top of the actual playing game, not the administrative game, not the coaching game, not the selectorial game. The two guys whose jobs would be on the line, i.e. Silverwood and Root, i.e. Fletcher and Hussein, to go, no, this stops now. And that's why I mentioned them so early. It's not their fault. I'm not saying that it's entirely down to them that the English game, red ball game that is on its knees. But if you're going to stop it, it's going to take a couple of giants, a couple of people who have the personality not to stand in front of the camera and go, well, we can take the positives here. We just lost 3-0 and been bowled out for 60 in front of the cameras. People are going to face and talk some hard truths themselves. And, you know, and I've been looking down at sort of like some of the numbers. You talk about the thing that Mark Ramprakash was saying in terms of the worries that a county batter has. Look, Luke Fletcher topped the averages, 66 wickets at under 15 this year. Chris Rushworth, top bowler, top bloke. Chris Rushworth, same. Top bowler, top fella, top pro, 59 wickets at 18. Tim Murtagh, 58 wickets at 14. Sam Cook, 58 wickets at 14, right? That's the way our game is at the moment in terms of county cricket, the types of pitches you're playing on. And so the batters, the batters' worries, as Mark Ramprakash mentioned this morning, are absolutely true. They're worried about these guys bowling sub 80 miles an hour, nibbling it all over the place. However, still stand more chance if your bat is coming down straight and you're moving in straight lines forward and backwards and not standing in front of all three stumps and giving the batters 2 meters of leeway in terms of their line, the making runs, than coming up with some bizarre idea of standing in front of all three. Now, coaches have allowed that. Dog throwers have allowed that, because these bloody things that only make the ball move inwards through the air kind of give batters the idea that they can protect their off stump because the ball is only coming in at them. When cricket balls, funnily enough, move both ways, as we've seen, and even straight balls are bloody lethal, given the techniques that we're seeing a lot of players using. And so it's just the whole thing has been driving me nuts for ages. I got called a dinosaur as well during the course of last summer because of the debate we had about batting technique, and yet the whole thing comes home to roost. And in the meantime, England have got probably their greatest ever batter and their greatest ever bowler playing in this team at the moment, by the way. Yeah, just think about that for a second. Greatest ever batter, greatest ever bowler, or modern era anyway batter, and they cannot get anywhere near this Australian team, in which a 32-year-old, you talk about medium pacers nibbling it around a bit. Well, what's Scott Boland if he's not one of those? So we should have been brilliant at that, right? It's just so it needs strong people who have got very, very strong and very, very clear ideas about the way the game of cricket should be played, right? I mean, it's pretty much as simple as that. That there is a sort of a time-honored and trusted way of doing basic things very well, and then players' talent will then come out on top of having those good basics. But if you don't have the basics to start with, you're in serious trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in 2021, Root averages 61 with the bat, Anderson 21 with the ball, and England have still they equalled Bangladesh's world record today with 9 defeats in the calendar.
Nine losses, yeah.
Yeah. I guess going back to Rob's article, I guess what's depressing, particularly depressing from what Farbase is saying, and if it's true, if what he's saying is right, and coaching problems go so far down that it's the fundamental levels when players are 14, 15, then you won't actually see the improvement at international level for ages. The lag time between those kids understanding the game properly to the international game is massive.
Well, no, but look, we have the resources in terms of professional cricketers, and in terms of money, in terms of financial resources, for this not to be the case. I mean, the guys playing, professional batters knocking around in the country at the moment are as gutted about all of this as we are. They're struggling their balls off to try and make runs and to try and get their careers moving in the right place. You give them pitches that are half decent to bat on, and you'll find players who will have less quirky techniques, who will be able to bat for a day and a half and score big runs. The guys were talking about it on the TV last night. If you think something's got your number on it every single time you walk out to bat, 30 off 20 balls is a good innings. I mean, that's that mentality is getting us killed or at least not that mentality. That lack of application being rewarded is getting us killed at Test match level, because if you can't work out why it is that you can't bring the bat down straight, or that you can't sort of sit in and be patient for 3 or 4 hours waiting for the game to get a little bit easier, then it's no doubt that you're going to go searching after balls that you shouldn't be playing at, because you want to see the scoreboard moving. You're jittery, you're nervous about the fact that you're sitting there and the bowlers are building up pressure. But that's the game, isn't it? I mean, it's 5 days Test matches. It's a hell of a long time, and building that kind of muscle memory, that resilience, that idea that you can be rewarded for sitting in and being able to leave the ball well and all those types of things needs to be something that these guys get used to feeling when they're playing at the level below.
Yeah, sorry, Yas, I totally echo that. It put me in mind, actually, going back to this thing that we ran in the magazine a few months ago. We had a brief interview with Marnus Labuschagne when he was at Glamorgan, and incidentally getting his front pad blown off by Darren Stevens every other week. But he said something interesting to us, and I've just actually picked it out again. He said, in England, the mental aspect of batting isn't utilised as much. If you're scoring runs in England, this is the key bit. If you're scoring runs in England, you're probably scoring at 70 runs per 100 balls. Reason? Because the swinging ball and quick outfields create scoring opportunities. In Australia, it's a grind. These are his words. Scoring at 50 per 100 balls and leaving a lot of balls because of the bounce. There are 2 challenges. One is about mental application, and the other is the technical challenge. Now, this is an interesting idea to me, that we've always in our heads said, well, if you get in Australia, then you can go big. But what you're actually seeing is the kind of almost like the inversion of that idea, that it's actually tough to bat in Australia, deliberately tough to bat in Australia, because these are proper cricket wickets, proper cricket pitches. Whereas in England, it's a combination of technique, attitude, playing at strange times, playing too much, squares being tired, groundsmen not having the time to turn a pitch into what they want. Obviously, result pitches being required with promotion and relegation and all the rest of it. And you throw all of these things into the mix, and what it results in is what Mark says. A batter goes out who's probably trailing 3 or 4 low scores anyway, and thinking, right, well, if I can get to 30 odd, you never know, I might even get to 45. And then, then I'm in for next week. Players going out and saying, right, today's my day, the sun's shining, today's my day, and I'm going to really bed down. Those days are long gone, and we have the stats. Run scoring in the championship has gone through the floor, and I have these stats right in front of me. I'm not going to bore you with them, but we all know it. And
can I chime in a second? Because it's interesting, because you know where I found the hardest place to bat in Australia? Adelaide.
Right.
I found Adelaide very, very difficult, because unless everything was working particularly well in terms of your timing, your footwork, you really had to hit the ball in Adelaide. You didn't get any angles. If the bowlers bowled straight enough and the ball didn't swing or didn't move off the seam, you weren't sort of inside half of the batting it for one, or running it down to third man or whatever it would be. The straight boundaries are really long. You had to really kind of be on top of your game in order to make the scoreboard move in Adelaide, if the bowlers were patient enough. And at Brisbane, funnily enough, I found a much easier place to bat than Adelaide, because there was more speed, there was more sort of bounce. You could work the angles a little bit more. It wasn't as necessary to get yourself miles forward or miles back in order to create scoring opportunities. So what he says is absolutely right. And one of the best innings I saw actually in Australia, sorry if this goes a little bit off piece, was Langer got a double 100 in the 98-99 series down there, right? It was 48 degrees. We had the old northerly wind coming in, and you couldn't keep moisture in your eyeballs. Like, blinking was painful down there. And he got 200 over the course of a day and a half. And it was a stunning innings. It really was. I didn't want to tell him because it's Justin Langer, but it was a stunning innings. We didn't bowl crap. We couldn't make the ball move sideways. He didn't want to get out. We weren't allowing him to score quickly or anything, but he just ground out an incredible knock. And that Marnus Labuschagne is talking about absolutely rings true to me. 100%. Sorry, carry on.
Right, we're going through quite a few macro issues. Phil, I kind of took the piss out of you after the first Test match when you said that you were angry, but there is a lot of anger out there. I, for one, was mildly irked during the first innings for sure, but I think that general anger is because there's a sense among fans that they care more about Test cricket than the ECB does, and maybe even some of the players do. For a lot of cricket fans, English cricket fans, this is their Football World Cup. A lot would stay up to watch an Ashes series in Australia, but not for a 50-over World Cup in Australia. You still get packed houses for Test matches in England, and it feels like we've kind of sleepwalked into this situation. The warning signs have been there for a while, but nothing quite as dramatic as the last few days have happened. So on what the ECB have been doing, what they can do, first off, where do you think they've gone most wrong? When people talk about, specifically, I guess, the prioritization of white ball cricket is something that's levelled at them quite a lot. What specifically do you think they've gone and done too far in that direction? What do you think is a fixable solution for the short to medium term?
This is the key question, and yet I don't have a succinct answer for you. I really don't. There are so many elements to it. It's simplistic to say we need to play more cricket in the heart of summer. Of course it is, but it would be useful. It would certainly be useful. It would be useful for groundsmen, and it would be useful for batsmen. So that would help. Have the ECB prioritise white ball cricket? Well, we play more red ball cricket than any other country in the world by miles. So if we are talking about developing players, in inverted commas, then they have more chance to play red ball cricket than anywhere else by miles. Dan Lawrence, I remember at the start of the New Zealand tour last spring, had a look at Henry Nicholls and Dan Lawrence, who were batting in the same position, and there was 6 years difference between the two of them. And Dan Lawrence had played more first-class games than Henry Nicholls had, and yet Henry Nicholls was 30 and Dan Lawrence was 24. We play a lot, but the question is...
the wrong type.
Exactly that. It's a diminishing returns. Rather than improving your game, you are instead just imbuing these kinds of draining habits and this sense of the grind just getting to you. And so it results in a kind of mental flimsiness, I think, and a frailty and a lack of love for it as well. And I think all of that sort of plays its part. The one specific thing, sorry, come to you in a second, Mark. The one thing about the ECB not caring about Ashes cricket is nonsense. They understand, and whether it's a cynical, money-driven thing or not, but they still know that Test cricket generates more money than any other form of the game in England. We're unique in that. We love the thing, and we want to protect the thing at all costs as a culture. I don't think there's an issue there. But I think in their mania to find some new avenues of revenue and income and new levels of popularity, and I have a lot of respect for that challenge, because I've done the numbers and I've written a lot about this over the years. I have a lot of respect for that. But I think in their mania to get to that point, I think something has been lost down the line. And so we've, as we know, we've pushed these things to the margins a little bit too much, I would say. But I would hesitate to throw the book at the ECB, because they are running a very, very, very challenging job here, and there are so many levels to it. This is not a game that was as popular now as it used to be, and that is a huge existential challenge that the game has to face. They've tried to develop a greater sense of cohesion at the bottom, but it's influenced, it's created havoc at the top. In the old days, it was the other way around. Under Lord Maclaurin and all the rest of it, at the turn of the century, if we had an okay England side, then it didn't matter that we were losing the grassroots. It didn't matter that numbers were going through the floor in terms of player participation, all the rest of it. They are slowly, belatedly trying to address the fundamental reason for why we play cricket in this country. But right at the top, the cherry on the top has gone off.
Related to that, Butch, I read a piece in the Cricketer the other day by Nick Friend, who wrote that in a game last year, Sussex fielded 10 privately educated cricketers. And, you know, we're talking about the talent pool England have available to them. And if overwhelming percentage of county cricketers are privately educated, that's by definition limiting the number of cricketers, the number of potential athletes you have at your disposal.
Yeah.
How big a problem is that for cricket? And obviously that's not something you can fix overnight, but this is something that's been slowly happening. It's been moving in one direction for a very long time now.
Yeah, well, it's a 30 odd year slide that's been, isn't it? And that's not cricket's problem. I mean, sorry, it is cricket's problem, but it's not cricket's fault.
Yeah.
The state school system simply does not have the time, space, resource, or frankly interest in a lot of quarters to even play cricket, to have cricket be part of the conversation. So where else are you going to get your players from I suppose is the question. Turning that around, you know, I know that, you know, clubs are doing their very best, but they're fighting for their own survival. They're trying their very best to kind of bring kids through. They rely on volunteers. People don't get paid to go and coach kids on a Tuesday and Thursday night and run teams and all the rest of it. And so as a consequence of that, the people that come through in a system that is not paid for by their parents are few and far between. And those are just the facts of the matter. I think that, you know, I don't blame cricket for that. It's the circumstances that have been led to by a succession of governments taking sport out of schools. And if you're taking funding away from the private or the public sector, you know, the things that are more difficult, the things that require more resource, and the things that require more time are going to be the first things that bite the dust. And guess what? That means cricket. I just going back to something that Phil mentioned there about, you know, the love of the game, or the white ball game, or the white ball game versus the red ball game, and the number of first class matches that English players get to play over the course of their careers. Again, I think I've probably mentioned this before, but just look at India's top two batters. Rohit at the moment is not playing, but KL Rahul has just made 130 down in South Africa opening the batting. KL Rahul, who also happens to score, you know, 15 ball 50s opening the batting in IPL cricket. It's a fallacy that these guys can't do both of these things. It really is. You know, if you technically they are, we saw them back during the summer against Anderson and Broad and co in English conditions, and saw how adept they were at playing for their off stump and technically correct they were. So they can go from doing it like that to batting with a strike rate of 200 in the short form game, because fundamentally they have very, very sound techniques. You know, these two things are not mutually exclusive. You can play all forms of the game based around some decent basics of having your back come down straight. You know. So sorry. Again, I veered off, but Phil.
No.
He keeps sparking me off. And it's you know, the thing is that all of these things in the current system we have, with the amount of players that we have, and again I go back to the resource that the ECB and English cricket has over and above New Zealand, over and above over above everybody but India, I suppose. There is no reason why things should be as bad as they are. There really isn't. There really isn't. But priorities have been so skewed, and dare I say it, people making big decisions about what happens in terms of the way the game is played are not cricket. They're not cricket people. If you allow the bean counters to make decisions based upon, you know, what the type of formats, when you should be playing, what happens when, how much cricket there is, etc., then you end up in a situation where the players frankly don't have any idea what's going on from one season to the next. They don't, and I feel sorry for them for that.
That moves us quite well on our first question from a listener. Danny asked, what are Australia and New Zealand doing well, which has made them so much better than England at old school Test cricket? Phil, do you want to have a go answering that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, as all of this, there aren't any obvious immediate answers.
So I think it's a really good question, because a lot of the criticisms that's been levelled at the ECB, these are problems in inverted commas in other countries as well. You know, other players in other countries are playing loads of white ball cricket, etc. You know, it's not just happening in England.
Which is why none of these problems are insurmountable. Exactly. What have New Zealand done? New Zealand decided to play on pitches that had more bounce and carry in them. That's what they did. Australia, the pitches are kind of always, they had a little bit of a wobble where they kind of were trying to bed in the Big Bash, and sort of Shield cricket took a little bit of a back seat to that, and they were up in arms about what was happening to the quality of Shield cricket, what was happening to the quality of their batsmanship. But in the end, they righted it, because, you know, for it worked for 50 years prior to that. And so they just went back to what they were doing before. They experimented playing with Duke's balls. They did all these weird and wonderful things, and found that the batters couldn't score any runs, and it was affecting their bottom line in terms of Test match cricket. So they reversed it and went back to how they'd always done it. Make the bowlers work for their wickets. Make spin play a major part in what you do, and have batters, you know, if they have the application and the mental strength and the technique allied with it, will be able to average, you know, high 40s, 50s, maybe 60s if they're good enough. And that's how their cricket. That's how they duffed us up all the way through the 90s until 2005 by having an absolute phalanx of batters averaging 60 plus who couldn't get in the team, and bowlers who could hit a pinhead like Pat Cummins.
This is bang on. It does remind me actually how envious I used to be when I was following cricket when you were playing, Mark, and looking at the Sheffield Shield versus the Championship and seeing how in the Shield you'd play once every 2 weeks, and obviously you'd only have 6 teams anyway, and so the concentration of talent was very clear. You were facing quality and you were playing alongside quality week after week, but crucially you weren't batting every other day against the red ball. And so if you get cleaned up on Tuesday, then it doesn't matter because you got another go on Thursday afternoon. In Australia, you would be playing every couple of weeks. And so you turn up there and the pitches are, as we know, and the conditions are there for you. You're going to be fighting tooth and nail, because that is a big, big moment for you in your first-class career. Whereas in England, it sounds a bit paradoxical, but the more we play, in certain cases, the uglier it gets. And so, and you imagine what it's like mentally, and you can tap into this, Mark, you know, when you were going through a bit of a trot, say, a bit of a bad trot, playing for Surrey back in the day and so on, it becomes just relentless, right? And it becomes almost kind of, it sucks any kind of real jeopardy and emotion from the occasion, because there's just so much of it, one after the other after the other. They're not events as they are in Australia. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And we used to have exactly those conversations. It's not something that has not been noted throughout the entire 20 years that I played. It did get better though. I mean, this is the thing. The most frustrating thing about all of this is that we've seen what happens when you do it right. You know, we were the #1 Test side 10 years ago. We had batters coming out of our ears. We've still got I suppose the most extraordinary thing is that those 2 bowlers are still playing. You know, those 2 guys are still playing. But we know how to do this. We know how to do this, and win T20 World Cups. And we've just, you know what I'm saying? That New Zealand, the World Test champions, and they've just reached the last 2 World Finals in white ball cricket. That none of this stuff is mutually exclusive. You can do all of these things. And I dare say that we are, in terms of physical resource, albeit they're all posh, And I went to private school as well. I was very, very fortunate because of various circumstances that happened in my parents' youth. To be able to get to be privately educated as well.
All right,
so
Mark, you wear your privilege very lightly, mate. It's fine.
Well, it's that's how it happened. My old man was a PE teacher at a very forward-thinking school, and therefore I got the chance to have the facilities and all that kind of stuff. So I've lost my thread now. None of these things are insurmountable for English cricket. We have all of these things. We're just misusing them to an extraordinary extent.
Sorry, Yas, and this is why there is this weird sense of almost closure. It can't get any worse than this. And the cat's out of the bag now. There's no place anymore for excuses or sort of equivalents or anything like that. That no one in the corridors of power can look down the lens of a camera at any point from here on in and say things are okay. You can't. And so there is that sense now that we're almost starting again from scratch. And so
didn't we have this after 17-18?
We did. And we had it after 06-07. The Schofield report rolled in a year and a half after we'd won the Ashes in 05. So for sure, we do go round and round and round. But it feels like it's more necessary now than it has been in a long, long time. It feels like, as I said right at the start, this feels more of an existential question about English cricket than it's felt in previous years.
Go back to the Test match itself. Joe Root didn't quite get Mohammed Yusuf's record for the most runs in a calendar year. He finished third eventually with 1,708 runs, just behind Viv's 1,710 in 1976. He scored a staggering 1,178 runs more than England's next highest scorer in 2021, Rory Burns. Great stat from Dave Tickner, by the way. By February the 6th, Joe Root had already scored over 100 more runs than any other England player would manage over the course of the
I mean, it's just horrendous, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is horrendous.
There were some, we've talked about bad batting, but there were some truly brilliant displays of bowling at various points in this Test match. I thought Cummins' opening spell on day one was epic. Stark's new ball burst on the second evening was thrilling. You can find fault in England's batters as much as we want, but that was really exceptional. According to CricViz, no new ball 5-over spell since 2006 has provided more expected wickets on their shiny new tool as Cummins and Stark there. I think that was actually my favourite bit of actual cricket in the series. You know, you have these two world-class quicks charging in that mini session, and they can give absolutely everything. The crowd was well-oiled. Batting was as tough as it was probably at any point in the Test match. And the noise for that Stark hat-trick ball was incredible, and Root just playing and missing. That was brilliant. And, we've got this guy in the pod, and we've not really mentioned Scott Boland on debut, 32-year-old, who takes 6 for 7 on the final day. And it's an amazing story as well. He was the player of the match at the Boxing Day Test. And these days, the player of the match at the Boxing Day Test is awarded the Muller Medal in memory of Johnny Muller, a leading player on the 1868 Indigenous Tour of England. And 153 years later, the second recipient of that medal is Scott Boland, the second Indigenous Australian to play men's Test cricket for Australia. I thought, in and amongst the horror from an English point of view, that was there was some really good cricket in there for a start, and B, an amazing story, and just seeing how happy he was and how happy the MCG crowd was for him as well.
Yeah, it was stunning to hear the noise every time he went anywhere near the ball. And yeah, he might stop Dizzy going on about his double 100 in Bangladesh now. No, I love you, Diz. Yeah, extraordinary. I mean, one of the conversation pieces, as we were all trying to kind of talk ourselves into a state of, no, it's going to be okay before the series started, was that, wow, Australia's fast bowling resources are not as deep as ours, etc., etc. But they've had two guys make debuts in the last two tests and take 5 in both, in Richardson and Boland. And Boland, it was another. I can't remember who the tweet was from now. I'll see if I can find it. But it was superb. Somebody musing that it was very clever of Australia to rest Scott Boland for the first 12 years of his career, just so that he was fresh for the fresh for the Test match.
Yeah.
Apologies to whoever that was. That
I think that was Barcelona, actually.
Was it? Yeah. It was, I mean, you know, and it was, Cummins is thrilling, isn't it? He's just an incredible quick bowler. It must have been a little bit like what it was like to have Lilly running in at you back in the old days. You know, just somebody who's a master of his craft and is quick enough to fill you in as well, which is not very pleasant. And of course, you know, again, another talking point before the series was Mitch Starc. Oh, he's all over the place. Warney didn't want him to play, all this kind of stuff. And he's got, 15, 14 wickets at 13, 14 or something. He's looked absolutely world beating. So, yeah, I mean, they've been super. And they've all, you know, 267 they scored and won by an innings. 267. And they had to fight pretty hard to get those, to be fair. I mean, that's kind of the difference, isn't it? England have got some, you know, a world-class bowler in their lineup. Mark Wood charged in and you know, a lot of runs went down to third man off him. But Jimmy was epic. But somehow they managed to fight that through and get themselves to a score which, you know, well, it shouldn't have been an innings-winning score, but was certainly par in the conditions that we saw.
Yeah, Phil, I guess that's one positive for England. It looks like they found a bowler who they can rely on for the next tour of Australia. 4 for 30.
Jimmy Anderson.
Yeah. 3 off 23 overs in that Australia innings. Got a stat for you. Over the last 7 years, Anderson has taken 107 wickets away from home at an average of 23.35. Nobody in the world, seamer or spinner, has taken more wickets at a lower average than Anderson away from home in that period. In the 12 away series Anderson has taken part in since the start of 2015, he's averaged under 30 in 9 of the 12 and averaged under 20 in 6 of the 12. In 2021, he averages less than 13 with the ball in away tests. Phil, you said you watched that Anderson spell on day 2 and you were mesmerised by it like everyone else.
6 overs, 1 for 1. Could have had 3 or 4. I mean, it kind of embarrassed Marcus Harris every other minute, became laughable towards the end. It was absolutely astonishing, really. But of course, it's all sort of heavy with sadness, isn't it? Because even this kind of anatomical freak can't go on forever, although he'll probably be convincing himself that he's just reaching his peak now. But it was, you know, it was a diamond in the rough, and Mark Wood as well, when he's played, has also turned up again as a quality Test match seamer. You know, he cleaned up Steve Smith and he cleaned up Marnus Labuschagne for low scores in both Test matches that he's played. So yeah, look, tiny little crumbs of comfort. I thought they fought well actually on day 2. The pride that we talk of in inverted commas, it's a kind of naff sporting trope, I suppose, but you could definitely get that sense on that second day. They caught pretty well as well. I wonder, Mark, you might be able to help me out. What do you think the atmosphere will be like in the England dressing room now between the bowlers and the batters, right? Do you and generally as well, do you think that it will be mutinous? Do you think that there will be fighting, scrapping, verbally at least, behind the scenes? Do you think that animosity levels will be creeping up, or do you think there'll still be a kind of sense of, look, we're doing what we can, we're just not very good?
No,
have you been there yourself? What's it like?
Yeah, I have. I think Jimmy's levels of snark will have reached you know, sort of epic Blade Runner 2049 proportions. But I just don't see that there are any of those types of characters in with the exception of Jimmy and Stuart to a lesser extent. I mean, I think we need to talk seriously about Stuart's sort of ongoing England career, because sorry, I'll get back to this in a second because this has been burning my backside. Australia have had to use bowlers, backup bowlers, because through circumstances. There's obviously the COVID positive or whatever it was, the COVID close contact for the captain of the second Test match. That meant that you know, that Jai Richardson played or whatever. Then obviously Hazelwood's injury, etc. For this one. Australia bring in their resources when they need to use them, either because of lack of form or because of injury. you don't start off a series thinking about leaving out players because you're going to rotate them sometime later down the line. I mean, this is another reason why the sort of like the whole management, the thinking is completely and utterly muddled. This is the Ashes. It's not some kind of warm up for another series that's coming along, as we seem to treat all of the other ones over the course of our summer. New Zealand, hello. And so, you know, you go into your test matches, you go into your big contests, playing what you think your best team is, and you change it given terrible form or injury to these players. You're not thinking about sort of how much of a workload they're going to have before they've even set foot on the field. You know, and it's that kind of muddled nonsense thinking. Yes, COVID has played a part in all of this sort of stuff, but if you're not going to try and get your very, very best 11 people you think are your best team on the field for 5 test matches in a row in Australia from the start, then you've got no chance.
Yeah,
these things should only change when they have to be changed. Not, you know, it blows your mind. This sort of like the management calls have been so off the mark. And that's before you even get down to what the batters are doing. And yeah, there is going to be some animosity between the batters and bowlers. Of course there will be. Of course there will be. Jimmy Anderson having to be back out there on the field again, batting to save, well, I don't know, save what, I don't know, but he's back out there in the middle again. I wouldn't be surprised if the Australians kind of like gave him a guard of honour just wandering back out there again so soon. I mean, just taking my boots off, lads. I'm out here batting again. What the hell is wrong with you? It doesn't do much for morale, it has to be said.
Moving on to management then. Michael asks, can Chris Silverwood survive this? Surely not, he says. Further to this, surely we must look to split the coaching job between test team and limited overs. Someone dedicated to the test side is needed without the distraction of ODI T20 series. That's something we talked about on the show before. Phil, what's your take on the leadership duo of Silverwood and Root? I think people are broadly in agreement that Silverwood probably won't last this. He gave an interview today that's been much criticised, where he basically said it was all broadly fair enough before he said that there are positives that we'll take out of this, which is just completely misreading the room. Phil, what do you think about not only Silverwood but Root as skipper as well?
I don't think Silverwood will last much longer in the job. That's my prediction. I think there will be a clamour for a more technical-minded coach, probably somebody from overseas, somebody with a proven record, and somebody who is available. The question will be, are they affordable? Gary Kirsten should have got the job, I felt at the time. I'm not being wise after the event. I thought he was the outstanding candidate, and he said himself in an interview with our magazine, but also with other outlets, that he thought he'd given a very good interview. He was quietly confident that he was certainly a key part of the conversation. And when they plumped for Silverwood, it felt at the time like an underwhelming appointment. It felt a bit quick for him as well. He'd done well at Essex, albeit over a short space of time, but he'd done really well at Essex, no question. He was England's bowling coach, and then suddenly he was England's head coach, and it was a meteoric rise for a very likeable bloke. But if we are acknowledging that big, hard decisions have to have been taken and big, difficult conversations need to have been had, and a little bit more of that kind of Owen Morgan cussedness or stubbornness or refusal to back down and to get what he needed to get that job done. I'm not sure if Chris Silverwood is that kind of character to challenge his bosses in the way that I'm not sure that Joe is by nature that kind of character either. Joe was born to bat. Owen Morgan was born to get his own way. On Silverwood, it would be a sad day to see the bloke go, because he's very popular, which is a key part of the job. But then, of course, he's been given too much responsibility anyway, as we know, and it's a ludicrous setup that they currently have. It's possible they could remove him from the head coach role, but keep him on in some kind of selection role, possibly, although that would feel like a fudge. But I have to be honest, you know, and if you want to clip this and stick it online and then I get a load of grief for it, I would love to see Gary Kirsten in place. I interviewed him a few weeks ago. He's still very much involved in the game, let's put it that way. And his record at international level is outstanding. He took India to world champions. He took South Africa to #1 in the world in the test stuff as well. And he was up for the job 3 years ago. And from our conversation, I certainly got the distinct impression he'd be up for it again.
I guess talking about the coach is more straightforward than the captain here. For a captain, you need someone in the team, and there's no. Butch, you said earlier in the show that England need giants, people who are going to stand up to the big people at ECB and demand what English Test cricket needs. Who's that person in the England team that's going to do that? I mean, a lot of people like Ben Stokes, the leader, but to be honest, I think he's a leader in how he conducts himself on a cricket field. But is he going to? He's been so close to the Root leadership era that I'm not sure you're going to get anything distinctly different there. He's someone who obviously plays loads of white ball cricket as well, so you possibly are going to get someone who's going to be completely devoted to Test cricket in the way you want your Test cap to be. So that's a really difficult one, because it's widely agreed that captaincy doesn't come that naturally to Root. So if we think that Root isn't the person to take the job on in the future, I'm not really sure who it is.
No, and you're right. Because I knew you were going to ask me this, I've sort of been racking my brains to think who that person might be to replace him. You know, he's now lost three Ashes series on the bounce. Well, I suppose lost the Ashes 3 times on the bounce, I should say, because they drew at home in 2019. His decision making, and again, you know, I suppose you look at that and go, well, the big headline decisions of either selection or what to do at the toss are things that are made by committee, I suppose, in modern day Test matches. So it's not entirely his fault that those were also painfully wrong at the beginning of the series. But you're right, there isn't anybody else. Ben Stokes, no, I wouldn't give it to him at all. That's another responsibility that he simply does not need. And you're right, he leads by deed rather than by rote, in a very similar sort of way to what happened to Freddie when he was given the captaincy. It was just a bridge too far for him. And there isn't, you know, the only other sort of first must pick in the team is 39 years old. And has had no, you know, and has no aspirations whatsoever to captain the team. So I cannot answer that question, which is why, you know, the Silverwood position becomes so much more important. Again, I completely agree with Phil, and I'm on the record saying this at the time, that the amalgamation of selector, head coach and everything is absolute nonsense. Should never, ever have happened. It's a disgraceful decision. I don't know who made it. You know, it should never, ever happen again. That needs to be separated, always. So that's that. And I think that there are lots of candidates, being one of them, around the world who could come along and actually be that guy. I mean, one of the great things about Duncan Fletcher back in the day was that he was from outside. He was from outside the system. He could look at it without any vested interest, I suppose, and come in and go, all right, well, this is what this. If we don't do it like this, then I'm off. I'm not doing it. Give me. I need the best chance. What's the best chance I can possibly have of making this succeed? And therefore, I need X, Y, and Z to happen in terms of the way that the players are prepared in the first class game. I need these type of players. I need quick bowlers. I need spin to play a major part in what we do. And I need batters with a bit of technique and a bit of ticker. Create me a system where that happens, or I'm not doing the job. And at the moment, you know, Chris Silverwood has no standing to be able to demand that from the people that hire him. It's almost as though because of the fact that he has all of these other roles, because of the fact that he has now been made indispensable in inverted commas. That demanding things of the people that have given him this exalted position becomes very, very difficult.
On the captaincy, I did say this 2 years ago, but I don't think it could happen now. I thought when England lost in South Africa, the first Test match to South Africa in 2019-20, the Centurion Test match, exactly 2 years ago this week actually, it was a Boxing Day Test. and it looked like Root's position was in question at least. I thought Broad would have been quite a good short-term appointment. At that time, he was still definitely in the team. He just come off the 2019 Ashes. He's someone who only plays Test cricket, not involved in the White as well. Definitely has strong opinions on how things should be run. He's seen close hand how a Test side has got to number one in the world. He knows what it takes. I think 2 years ago that would have been quite a shrewd appointment. But at 35, he's not in the team. Under, can you see him staying in the team even if he does play the first Test in West Indies? Can you see him staying in the team for 2 years? Probably not at this stage. So you're completely out of options.
Stewart is still a fantastic bowler, and all of those things ring true in terms of his standing in the game, in terms of his thoughtfulness about the game and his knowledge of how things should be done. But again, I go back to the idea that if you go on a trip with two guys who have over 1,300 Test match wickets between them, and your first thought is, I can't play both of them at the same time, then one of them shouldn't be there. Do you know what I mean? If they're not going to be in your best bowling attack for whatever reason, I'm not privy to the conversations, but if you think that your best way of being able to win an Ashes series is by not having those two guys play together, then one of them shouldn't be there. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's kind of like if this isn't your best bowling attack, and you make changes based upon injury or loss of form, then what the hell are they doing there? What the hell is he doing there? He's wasting his time. He could be making a fortune telling everybody how to do it on the telly instead. Do you know what I mean? So you're right. His time has come and gone. You know what this whole thing's reminded me of is a little bit of the way that the West Indies sort of dribbled out of the 90s, I suppose, with Lara holding up one end as sort of a captain who was unpopular as captain, whether that's just inter Ireland or whatever, or wasn't perhaps the most astute guy on the field, but was the best player, and Courtney Walsh holding things together with the ball, and the team lurching from one miserable series to another, albeit with the odd bit of glory knocked in there as well. And this whole thing with England reminds me of exactly the same. Joe Root is Lara, Jimmy Anderson is Courtney Walsh, and the team around them generally is not very good, or at least not performing particularly well. But I cannot answer the question around the captaincy, which makes the whole thing around, which makes Silverwood the man who is absolutely in the crosshairs.
I would say to Joe at the end of this series, don't do West Indies unless you really, really deeply want to. Take yourself away for a bit. Have a few conversations with people who you trust. Put the bat down for a moment. Go on holiday. Just try and decompress a little bit, and then have a conversation after the West Indies series, because I don't see any obvious alternative candidate. And I think with Root, while clearly we see that there are tactical deficiencies, no question about that. Jack Leach opens the bowling straight after lunch on day 2, and there's 4 men on the leg side boundary straight away, and all of that. We've seen some peculiar selections. We've seen some peculiar decisions on the pitch. One thing he does have is immense respect and immense likability within the dressing room, which goes a long way. And in the absence of any obvious alternative candidates, Rory Burns doesn't know if he's going to get in the side. Josh Butler probably Test match cricket in a couple of weeks anyway, and Ben Stokes has got loads and loads on his plate. Stuart Broad, I get it, but as Mark says rightly, his time has gone, probably, almost certainly. So there really aren't any other candidates. And so I would let Root. I wouldn't put a line through Joe Root as a captain yet. I just wouldn't. But if he can't face it anymore, as say Cook couldn't. Famously, Cook said, only so many times I can go to the well. And he jacked it in after another reversal. That one was in India, but he jacked it in after fewer Test matches in charge than Joe has had at a similar age in his Test match career. So if Joe turned around at the end of Hobart and said, this is me done, no one would question it. But I think in the complete absence of alternatives, I would hesitate to say, right, the Joe Root era is finished. Because I know it's not an answer that works well for headlines, but I mean, my word, if there was another big player in that side that didn't happen to be carrying all the load that Ben Stokes is, if there was another real thinker with a bit of balls, a bit of arrogance as well, you know, that kind of that Owen Morgan-esque, I'm not taking any nonsense, that kind of character. If there was one in the side who was assured of his place, then yeah, for sure. And Joe would probably say, here's the armband, thanks very much. But where is that person?
I guess go back to 2016, it was much easier for Cook to resign then, knowing that there was this next man in waiting, somebody who'd been earmarked as featuring the captain since he first played for England as a 21-year-old.
Yeah.
Moving on to so last question, I promise. Luke asked, it's quite clear that the Test team is in need of reform as part of the rebuilding process. What should England do for the Test series against West Indies in the spring? I think that's a really interesting question, just because there's no first-class cricket in between the end of this tour and the start of the next one. You're going to have a number of battles, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them maybe, who are going to be so out of nick with numbers that are genuinely horrifying for a test batter to look back on. So what do England do? Because you go through some of the selections England have made, and we've not really debated selections that much this series. Broadly in agreement that this is the best group that England have available to them, pretty much. You look at some of the selections like Hamid. Hamid basically was only picked. It's a great story and all that, don't get me wrong. But there was basically no one else. There was no one who was clearly the next option to open the batting in county cricket. You know, Sibley had been dropped. Crawley was really struggling. James Bracey played 2 test matches and struggled. There was no one banging down the door in county cricket. So what do England do now, moving forward in the short term? How would you go about selecting squads for those series? Would you, by and large, pick the same group of players, or
I just briefly, I would treat this upcoming series against West Indies as an opportunity to try and rebuild a little bit of love between the England side and the punters. And if that needs a quiet word in the ear of Joss Buttler, Johnny Bairstow, Joe Root, even Ben Stokes, and say, look, I'm not saying that your career is done, but for the moment, let's just park this winter. Go away, get your head together, and we'll pick things up in April for the start of the English series, English summer. And I would be tempted to live a little with the batting, to live a little, to have a look at Liam Livingstone, to have a look at Joe Clark, to bring in, you know, another opening bat who maybe has something a little bit unusual. Someone like Vasconcelos, for example, who's got real talent, plays it in his own way. Someone like Jake Libby. I'm not saying that these are the answers, but what we desperately need now is an infusion of sort of shaky optimism to try and get a few people back on side. Because if we turn up there with the same old faces who are tired and fed up and not enjoying it, and they have their eyes elsewhere anyway, and they're mentally shot from what they've had to go through just now, then far more interesting and far more useful, I think, in the long term, to have a look at 1 or 2 others. Give Dan Lawrence a game in the middle order alongside Liam Livingstone. Why not? Why not?
I think you want to find a couple of players of real character. You've got to make a decision about somebody like Rory Burns. I mean, what the players can do in between the end of the Ashes series and the beginning of the Test matches in the West Indies is go and do an enormous amount of work, of technical work. You know, one of the beauties of having that bit of time off is that you can lock yourself in the indoor school. I know, you know, conditions are it's not outdoors, but you don't need outdoors to be able to work on the way that your body moves, your position, your backlift, your weight transference, all of these things, and take the time to work on technique without having to worry about the scoring of runs. And so, you know, that I wouldn't necessarily be discarding everybody that's on this trip. You know, it might be nice to see who's the young fella, the left-hander. Good gracious, left-hander from Warwickshire.
Yates.
Yeah, Rob. He really impressed me last year. You've also got, you know, one of the things I liked about the selection of Dawid Malan was the fact that you've got somebody who is a little bit older. I mean, I think we get so seduced by the idea of youth and guys making their way in the game. So I wouldn't mind seeing, England picking a couple of guys who are in their 28, 29, 30, the prime of their career as county run scorers, and getting them out there and trying to create a little bit like what NASA did at the end, the beginning of the 2000s, leading up to that 2005 series, was put together a bunch of hard-nosed bastards who will go out there and grind out runs at whatever scoring rate you want, give the bowlers a chance to be able to go out there and take 20 wickets, and build confidence by scoring big runs and winning test matches. I know what Phil's saying, but I don't agree with kind of like lobbing in a load of kids and potentially having the losses rack up and continue, because losses create conversations like the ones we're having, and create the idea that there's a revolving door of selection. You need to stabilize. You need to stabilize and then bring talented youngsters into a team that knows what it's doing. You don't throw them to the wolves in a team. It's a little bit like, how do I put it? It's a little bit like, you have, you pick a sort of like a talented sort of team full of kids, 18, 19 years of age, at second team level or whatever. They're all the same age. They're all out of school. They've all played together, etc. They go and play against sort of opposition who is a little bit more road worn, a little bit more hard nosed, and they lose, and they keep losing. They've got nobody to learn from in the 11 with them, because they're all of the same sort of experience, and therefore their confidence and their skill and their sort of bravado eventually gets chiseled away to a point where they're no good, where they're gone, they're shot to bits. What I don't think that England needs is to send out a bunch of ingenues to the West Indies. Imagine we get beat by them away from home, and we haven't won a series in the West Indies since 2004. Going down there and winning is not something that's straightforward, by the way. And so you need to treat that with the respect that they deserve and Test match cricket deserves. Take a team down there that you think is going to win. And so I wouldn't mind seeing somebody like Sam Robson maybe have another go, even if it means bring back Adam Lyth. Get some guys in there who have got a little bit of, who have had a taste of it before, had it taken away from them, and a kind of like a gritty, a desperate to kind of have another shot at it. And then maybe once the whole thing is stabilised, you can think about throwing in some of the gun youngsters. And in the midst of that, I don't mind if Liam Livingstone gets to go playing Test match cricket batting at number 5 or number 6. You have a bit of X factor thrown in there. I want to see Ben Folkes back in the team, keeping wicket, batting 7. That's how I would go about it. I would be very, very nervous about going, there's a bunch of 22, 23-year-olds with potential. Go out there and do better than the guys who have tried to do it on potential before, because I don't think that's going to work.
I get that. But then you look at the story of Joss Buttler at the moment, you look at the story of Johnny Bairstow at the moment, they are both big personalities in that dressing room. They are part of the inner sanctum. And they're hating life. They can't stand it. Joss Buttler will definitely be considering his Test match future for sure.
Well, I wouldn't.
Johnny Bairstow's not scored a run in 3 or 4 years.
No, but I wouldn't pick him for the West Indies. I just said I'd like to see Ben Folkes play. And I don't. And that's not a selection based around a wing and a prayer. This is a guy who's one of the best keepers around, and is a solid player with the bat, technically decent player with the bat. Yeah. That's not rip it all up and start again. That's somebody that's been unfortunate not to have played more Test matches over the last 12 months for one reason or another, whether that be he had a terrible injury or whatever. So that I don't see a problem with that. And Johnny Bairstow, I don't see an issue with. But again, is Johnny Bairstow not sort of used up whatever the currency might be? We're talking about players with with weird, quirky techniques, and all of it, and sort of saying the basic tenets of batting have been moved away from to such an extent that it's unrecognisable now. And now you're talking, Dan Lawrence wobbling around all over the place, batting at 5. You want. Who was it you mentioned batting at the top of the order?
Vasconcelos.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's a decent player. I don't think he has a quirky technique, to be honest. He's just a little short, nuggety left-hander. Reminds me a bit of Thorpe. So I mean, that's not a terrible shout at all. But if you send out there a bunch of guys, a top 6, if you include Joe, a top 6 who have got. I don't know, how many Test matches Joe played now? 98, 90's coming up for 100?
120.
Right. Okay. So, but a top six that has 130 caps with Joe Root having 120 of them, what's your likelihood of being successful under that? And you end up in the same situation where you're relying on Root to score all the runs. I don't think that's the way to do it.
I like how we've spent nearly an hour and a half talking about this, and we've pretty much agreed that Adam Lyth and Sam Robson are the future of English batting.
Well, look, Look, the thing is, it doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter who, in many respects. What it matters is, have these guys got the sort of like, are they up for the fight? Do they have the sort of like the nous and the grizzled, gnarled capability to go out there and turn this thing around? And again, there has to be a starting point from somewhere. And yes, ideally, you'd want all of these young chargers to be out there and playing with gay abandon. But this is not a time for gay abandon. It really is not.
But it is a time to find some alternatives when, almost to a man, the people that have been blooded in the last 2 or 3 years are just not delivering, are they?
Well, no, I mean, but that's what I'm saying.
Burns is the third most experienced player in the side with the bat, and he averages 27, 28, and his concerns are all to see. You know,
yes, but what
Steve Blessing has made 50 runs in 3 Test matches. Zach Crawley's averaged 11. So all of these kind of.
But what I'm saying is you don't replace a lot of players who are failing at that level, right? Some of whom, i.e. Rory Burns, have been very, very successful in an era where batters haven't been scoring any runs. Ollie Pope's another one who's been incredibly successful in an era where nobody else scores any. You know, so what you're talking about is replacing these guys who have been very successful at county level with guys who are less successful at county level and are perhaps more flaky than they are in terms of their technique. What I'm saying is, if you're going to replace them with some guys who have been around for a little bit longer and might be able to handle themselves a little bit better at the level in order to stop the bleeding. You can end up, you know, going back to myself, I went 2001, I got back into the test side. I didn't miss a test match for 3 years. And so 2001, I was 29. And so you know, probably the prime time of my career, I played 40 test matches back to back for England in that time, right? And that's, you know, I had a chance at the age 24 and I wasn't good enough then. And there's some other fellas who are playing county cricket at the moment who are in a similar boat. They had a chance at age earlier, got found wanting, got left out, have had a chance to go away and mature and do the rest of it and come back in. It's no disgrace to be picking people who have had a chance, who have had a go before. I'm not saying that you do that as a wholesale, but I wouldn't mind seeing one or two of them knocking around the squad, so that kids have got some people who've got mountains of runs and experience behind them, as opposed to looking around and going, well, who do I talk to about this? We can't all be sat there in Joe Root's room every night.
I think at the top of the order, I don't think there's really an alternative to going back to someone who's already had a go. I think we've been talking for about an hour and a half on why England can't bat. I hope that's answered your questions sufficiently enough. Cheers, Butch. Cheers, Phil. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast in association with Charles Tyrwhitt. Remember, you can get an extra 10% off the Charles Tyrwhitt sale with the code Wisden10. See you next time.